Sara, and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Exploitation of Black and Indigenous people was integral to the founding and formation of the United States and to the economic power that enabled the country standing today as an international superpower. But the nature of that exploitation wasn't exactly the same. In this month's episode of Meet the BIPOC Press, I'm happy to welcome back Mitra Kalita of Epicenter NYC and Sara Lomax Reese of Philadelphia's WURD. Together, they're the co-founders of URL Media, a network of independently owned and operated Black and brown media outlets, and together, every month, they host this special episode. Today, they're going to explore the intersections between Blackness and indigeneity. One of our guests, Kyle Mays, asks, how can we imagine and put into praxis a world in the aftermath of settler colonialism and white supremacy? To answer that question, Sara, Mitra, over to you. I look forward to joining you at the end of this episode.
Thanks so much, Laura. It's great to be back after a brief hiatus. Today, we're going to be talking about this intersectionality of Black and Indigenous peoples, our struggles, our shared oppression, and our shared strength. And to have that conversation, we have Levi Rickert, who is the founder of Native News Online and the publisher of Native News Online. He's also the author of Visions for a Better Indian Country, and he's a citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. And we're also joined by Dr. Kyle Mays, who is from the Saginaw Chippewa Nation, and he's an associate professor of African American Studies, American Indian Studies, and History at the University of California in Los Angeles. He's also the author of An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States. So welcome, Levi and Kyle. It's great to have you with us. There's a lot of shared history between Black and Indigenous people, but a lot of that history is unknown and untold. And so I wanted to kick the conversation off with asking about what are the differences, what are the shared experiences, but also those things that have been unique around the oppression of Black and Indigenous peoples. And I'll start with you, Levi Rickert from Native News.
First, let me start with the shared things that we have in common with African Americans. And you go back historically, when slaves would actually leave plantations, they would be, in some cases, actually, they would go to like the Seminole tribe down in Florida, some Choctaw Nation, Chickasaw Nations, and actually would hide out, and they would be welcomed by the Native people back in the 1800s, and I would even say the 1700s. So there's that common ground there. I would say the difference has been, and it really came to light during the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, when some American Indians felt as if they really didn't need to become part of the Civil Rights Movement because we had treaties. However, to me, and I was a child, obviously, back then, but thinking back, we should have joined because treaties, what treaty has been totally fulfilled? Absolutely zero. So to me, that was a lame argument, but that was one of the biggest differences back then.
We can begin with one of the most important Native intellectuals in the 20th century, Vine Deloria Jr., who wrote Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto, that the major differences between African Americans and Native peoples was that Indigenous peoples were seeking treaty rights, or simply for the United States government to honor the treaties. And as Levi pointed out, they have violated every treaty, or at least not honored every treaty that they've ever made with every nation in the U.S. And the second part of that is African Americans are fighting for civil rights or integration, right? But what sort of gets flattened in that particular history, using someone like Stokely Carmichael, who would change his name to Kwame Ture, he's very adamant in saying that this was Native people's land. And as African Americans, should we be seeking integration into the US? And what things in common do we have with Indigenous peoples? And I think that was a powerful moment in the history of Black and Indigenous interactions. Now, as far as similarities, I think there are many similarities, whether it's a shared ideology about what sort of oppression that they're experiencing. Now, we can say that people of African descent were enslaved and Indigenous peoples experienced settler colonialism, that is the taking of their land. And those are, historically different phenomena. But the commonalities, if we really consider those Africans who were kidnapped from the continent, those were Indigenous peoples who had their own languages, land, and cultures. And even though they were enslaved, that was not just evaporated or erased. And I think that's an important thing to really think about in pre-revolutionary America.
There's this shared oppression. Clearly, Black Americans and Native Americans have experienced, although it's very different. But I also see that there are challenges around acceptance and embracing of Black people in particular, because as I look at you, Kyle, you look like a Black man. You look like a Black American to me.
This is true.
And so many of us as Black Americans have Native American ancestry, but we can't necessarily trace it directly to a Native American tribe. But it seems like there's not necessarily the reciprocated embrace of Black people who have Native heritage in the Native American culture as there is in the Black culture. And I wanted to see if we could talk about that differentiation.
I think one of the differences to consider is that Indigenous nations have their own protocols as to who is a citizen or not, right? And while someone might look Black, someone might look white, and I'll get to what I consider anti-Blackness sometimes. While someone might look Black, someone might look white, it's about your citizenship within that particular nation, right? Now, many issues, whether it's blood quantum and so forth, have been imposed upon Indigenous nations. And I would argue that they do have the ability, if they desired really, to alter some of those protocols as to who can become a citizen or not. But it's not very simple either. Now, certainly, I think there are various forms of anti-Blackness. My family is from Detroit, and they certainly experienced various forms of anti-Blackness, but they're also prominent activists in the city of Detroit around education, around culture in the city of Detroit, at least since the 1960s. So it is a thing, but there's also been various forms of, we'll say, Native erasure from Black people as well. So it's a very complicated issue, whether that's nationhood and how, we'll say, Afro-Indigenous peoples are treated both by Black people and Indigenous peoples.
Levi, what do you say about that?
Well, and let me just say this. When I attend national conferences, for instance, the National Congress of the American Indians, first time I went there, and years ago, I was really struck with the notion that, wow, Native Americans come in all colors and sizes, so to speak. You can see a blonde, blue-eyed Native American. You can see who someone appears to be African-American, Native American. And I want to say this, that we have come a long way, and I will speak about the Cherokee Freedmen, which was very controversial. I mean, Representative Walters held up some housing legislation because she didn't feel as if African Americans who are Cherokees were getting the proper due justice. And the current chief, Chuck Hoskin, has really brought the tribe, I'm going to say, light years. And it's an evolving situation. And the good news is it's going in the right direction, where they are embracing the African Americans who are in fact Cherokee. So throughout the United States, you see various tribes. One tribe here in Michigan, here on Potawatomi, when I go to their functions, it seems that there are, I want to say, a good 25% who are African Americans. And so they are totally embraced. some are on tribal council. And so it's good news. We are moving in the right direction.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. Today's show is our Meet the BIPOC Press monthly roundtable discussion with the founders of URL Media, Mitra Kalita of Epicenter NYC, and Sara Lomax Reese of Philadelphia's WURD, Pennsylvania's only African-American owned talk radio station. This month, they explore the role of the media in centering indigeneity and Blackness at the intersection of colonialism and white supremacy. They're joined by two guests. Levi Rickert of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation is publisher and editor of Native News Online and the author of Visions for a Better Indian Country, One Potawatomi Editor's Opinions. And Dr. Kyle T. Mays of the Saginaw Chippewa Nation. He's an associate professor at UCLA, teaching in the departments of African American Studies and American Indian Studies and History. He's also the author of An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States. You can watch the show on our YouTube channel and on over 300 public television stations across the country by going to lauraflanders.org for more information. And while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter to receive information on all of our streaming events and web exclusives, including the upcoming podcast release of the full uncut conversation from today's show. You can find more Meet the BIPOC Press roundtable discussions in our archives. Next, what was the shift that led to the recent rise of greater Native consciousness around the relationship between Blackness and indigeneity? But first, here's Amalgamation by Doom Cannon from his debut album, Renaissance, released on Browns Wood Recordings.
I think the country is just starting to catch up to some of the history and the overlaps that you're mentioning. Levi, can I ask you what changed over the last 2 or 3 years? We've talked, of course, on this show a lot about the death of George Floyd. I don't know if that's what prompted it or if there's something more that led us to this current consciousness.
Certainly the George Floyd killing, and then the riots and the uprising that took place afterward, you can see them coming together. I mean, for instance, the Washington football team's name was changed as a result of what happened to George Floyd. You can tie it back with AOC telling a radio station that it's time for Snyder to change the name. And all of a sudden, corporate America was really, really aware of the fact that George Floyd there's some legitimacy to the concerns surrounding his death and how African Americans and other brown people were treated, quite frankly. And so when AOC tied that in, they asked the mayor of Washington, she agreed. And then next thing you know, FedEx pulled the funding. When corporate America, and that's the sad reality. Oftentimes in America, it's always driven by money. But at the same time, in this case, it worked out okay. But there has been a shift, and I'm happy with it. I personally, through the years, have totally embraced African American community. It's just I grew up in a church that was African American predominantly, and so I just feel like as if it's time, and I'm happy it's happening.
Kyle, what do you think? What's changed?
I think the real beginning of the change was probably the activism around the Dakota Access Pipeline in 2015. And so for me, that was also the Flint water crisis. And that was a watershed moment where You also had the Movement for Black Lives actually making a statement in solidarity with the resistors at the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe who were resisting the Dakota Access Pipeline. So for me, that was really the first moment, at least since the 1970s, where you found this major intersection of Black and Indigenous protesters. So that's certainly, those are two particular events that I recall very recently that really started to see a shift in Native consciousness as far as Black people really being aware and invested in a very mainstream sense of the things happening to Indigenous nations, in this case, in particular, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe.
We often at URL Media talk about centering Blackness in our own organization, as well as the organizations we work with. Do you hear that in a different way, given your overlapping identities? I just wonder, as an Afro-Indigenous, both scholar and person, how you hear that.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated for me. So, I'll use as a jumping point the Combahee River Collective Statement, authored by folks like Barbara Smith and so forth in 1977. And they have and I'm paraphrasing here, they have a quote here that says, when Black women are free, all people are free. Now, on the surface, that makes a lot of sense, but I would always think differently about that in the sense of, and this is related to centering Blackness. So if all Black people are free, does that necessarily mean a return of land to Indigenous peoples, right? And I think that has to be a part of the conversation. So I think it's imperative to not only center Blackness, but also to center Indigenous peoples, because upon whose land were African Americans exploited. This is Indigenous land. And thus, I argue in the book that the enslavement of people of African descent and the dispossession of Indigenous peoples are foundational to U.S. democracy. And so I see that both of these things have to be centered if we're, in fact, going to move forward.
You know, Kyle, I was watching a talk that you gave, and one of the questions was about cultural appropriation versus appreciation, cultural appreciation. And one of the things that happens a lot now in places are land acknowledgements, where there's a recognition that we are on Indigenous people's lands, and there's a ceremony or some type of acknowledgement that happens. And I'm curious, as we look towards Indigenous Peoples Day on October 10th, what is actually legitimately going to move the needle to improve the lives of Indigenous people in this country?
But I think one of the major things is, one, honoring the treaties, like that's this sort of basis. And two, returning land. So there's certainly a land back movement. The city of Oakland had returned like some portions of Oakland, or at least acknowledge it as being native land, which is fine. And the Onondaga Nation, the state of New York returning acres to them in central New York. So we can talk a lot about, the changing of things and things getting better, more representation. But to me, fundamentally, it has to be about returning land, because returning land will deal with all sorts of issues around white supremacy, settler colonialism, and so forth.
And Sara, first of all, let me thank you for using the term Indigenous Peoples Day versus Columbus Day. So we're already making progress, and I was happy when you did that. But to the point, the land acknowledgement is a big piece, and it makes me stop. And I'm a Native person, and I kind of smile when I see it and I hear it happening when I'm at a public event. And I think it's just really, they're again showing their respect to the people, our ancestors who were here, and the acknowledgement of the land and acknowledgement of the waterways that this country, through corporate greed, has totally destroyed our environment to the point where we are in a major crisis. And so it all ties together, but just land acknowledgement, water acknowledgement. But I'm going to go right back to fix the needs of American Indians. We need to really keep the gas pedal on, getting Congress to appropriate the proper level of funding. We still have some of the highest levels of disparity when it comes to health disparity, lack of housing. You talk about a third of the people on the Navajo Nation do not have running water or electricity. That is third world living conditions. And this is what our Native people are still living with. And we need to really work hard in I want to say this, we have made progress. We even seen some short-term progress even since the stimulus from the pandemic funding. But so money does solve a lot of problems, and the average American is one paycheck away from being homeless. So tell me money doesn't make a difference. It makes all the difference in many cases.
And we're coming up on a very contentious midterm election in November that could reshape the way government happens in the country. And I want to see if both of you could speak to what are the key issues in Black and Indigenous communities, those intersectional issues that are going to mobilize turnout in those communities.
There again, I'll say with a smile on my face, we had the first ever Alaska Native who beat Sarah Palin to become a congresswoman, Mary Patello. When I asked her about it, I said, Mary, you're pro-choice. And what's the issue for you around that? And she said, for your audience, I'm reminded of how often Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, were sterilized without their knowledge or consent. And this happened during the 1970s. It's very well documented. And she said that is one of the basis of what her thought process is. And I saw something on Twitter just this morning. She put on that the government should not tell Indigenous people when and where to have children. And so I just think that's going to be a big piece of the midterm elections. Certainly issues around sovereignty. We did a study and we're about ready to launch a survey to really glean from our community what's important for them during this election. But I'm going to borrow from the last presidential election when we surveyed our audience, and it was sovereignty issues. American Indians still want to protect their sovereignty as nations. Right now, we have a critical Supreme Court case, Breakin versus USA, coming up in November 9th, I think it's going to be heard. And it's really a pushback to the Indian Child Welfare Act from 1978. And what really frustrates me about this, it's been going on for a number of years now in the Supreme Court, but the big pushback has been from the Goldwater Institute. Well, back in 1977, when Barry Goldwater was a U.S. Senator, whose institute was named after, he voted in favor of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And it just makes sense that tribal nations have the right to raise our children. And that really bothers a lot of right-wing conservatives. But those are some of the key issues for us.
How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I echo all of those things, but a particular focus on urban areas as well. So housing, issues around housing, the ability to afford housing. As we know, interest rates are really high, and the ability to purchase a home. And I'm in LA, increasing homelessness amongst all sorts of populations with people of color, Indigenous peoples, both from Central America and South America who have come over here, and also Indigenous peoples local to Los Angeles. So housing is one of those major issues that has been ongoing, both on and on the reservation. And clean water, whether that's Jackson, Mississippi, whether that's Flint, whether, as Levi mentioned earlier, on the Navajo reservation and various reservations with clean water. And those environmental issues remain at the core, whether you're on the reservation or in a city. So those remain very important issues throughout Indian country.
Thank you both so much for being with us on Meet the BIPOC Press today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief McWitch. My pleasure.
Well, thanks, you two. That was a great conversation. As you did, Mitra, I was particularly taken with that interesting point about homelessness, houselessness, and land rights. That connection, I wonder, is how that's getting handled in campaigning. And more broadly, I was interested in organizing. Are there examples that the either of you are aware of, even this election season, where that alliance between African Americans and Native Americans is coming into play?
One thing that struck me was Levi's feeling like the acknowledgement and even the mention of Indigenous is such progress. I think the other point that does relate to politics, as you're asking about, is the Dakota pipeline. It really struck me how it can feel like the turning of the screw from a news cycle perspective. But then when you stack all these events against each other, again, you start to see how that really does affect change. I might sound overly positive, Laura.
Well, just to even the score, I will point out that Mary Patola victory in Alaska, while huge against Sarah Palin, was in a special election, which is going to be refought this November with a whole lot of people paying a whole lot more attention and probably pouring more dark money into it.
The thing that was interesting to me about the conversation is that we don't always or often have a focus and a spotlight on this intersectionality between Black and Indigenous cultures, communities, movements. And I think that one of the things that excites me about URL Media is that we kind of force those conversations because we are showcasing the content that Native News Online is doing, us on alongside what the Haitian Times is doing, alongside what Epicenter is doing. And so we're bringing all of these different cultures and perspectives together in one place and identifying those shared experiences, those shared challenges. And one of the things that Kyle Mays said in one of his talks was that that's a very dangerous thing. History has shown us. He pointed to Fred Hampton, who was a young man, I think he was 21 in Chicago, who was bringing all of these different groups, racial and ethnic groups, together to fight to overturn poverty and to overcome all of these areas of disenfranchisement that cut across different racial and ethnic groups. And he was essentially murdered by the state. So there is a historical framework that makes this work somewhat dangerous, because to mobilize people of color writ large can be very transformative and, again, very challenging to the system.
Well, URL Media is doing intersectionality in action, and that's why we love checking in with you every month. People want to know more about the Fred Hampton story. I encourage you to check out Judas and the Black Messiah. I appreciate you both and look forward to next month's episode of Meet the BIPOC Press. Sara, Lomax, Reese, Mitra, Kalita, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
For more information on this week's guest, go to patreon.com/TheLF where you will find a suggested reading list and additional related episodes to explore from our archives. That's also where you'll find an invite to watch the premiere of each week's show on our YouTube channel and chat real time with Laura Flanders, Sundays at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All those details, again, are at patreon.com/TheLF. Please join us for an in-person fundraiser event coming up Sunday, October 16th at Catskills Provisions in Callicoon, New York. It's an exclusive live taping where Laura will be in conversation with environmentalist Bill McKibben of 350.org and Third Act. In addition, he'll be signing copies of his latest book, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. The event is hosted by Catskill Mountain Keeper, an organization empowering environmental justice communities throughout the region toward a 100% clean and just energy future. The event is also sponsored by Catskill Provisions Pollinator Spirits, a woman-led company that donates a portion of their proceeds to support the bees. We are listener and viewer-supported media. We are not funded by PBS, and we remain independent of government and corporate funding. We could not do this show without you. Please support us either monthly as a Patreon partner or by making a one-time donation. All those options to choose from are at lauraflanders.org/donate.
This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, along with Sabrina Artel, Nat Needham, David Newman, Rory O'Connor, Alicia Duque, Jeanette Hernandez, and Jeannie Hopper. Major funding for this program is provided by the Novo, Park, Ellen Poss Family, Hisuku Wilson Foundations, the Schumann Media Center, Rising Fund at Tides, Kim Connor and Nick Groombridge, Jane Fonda, and listeners like you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for your ideas. Stay kind. Stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.